I would like to invite Dr. Pramod Varma. He is the former chief architect of Aadhaar and India Stack and various other initiatives within India Stack. He is the CTO of Step Foundation, co-founder of the Beacon Protocol, co-chair at the Center for DPI in G20, and here with us to share some very interesting points on governance in technology-led DPIs.
So very interestingly, just before we start, the protocol thinking, I was telling Nandan, started in 2014 when we were writing the eSign protocol. eSign is a pure marketplace-driven open protocol story. We didn't call it protocol, and we didn't have a network topology issue there. It was mostly open API game, but there was no platform. eSign has zero platform. So it's a very interesting thing to remember that we began the early journey even then. And then DigiLocker, if you look at the original note that we had written up for METI, it was completely equivalent to what became Deeper. But of course, it was too early, ahead of time, and it became an app, and it remains an app, and we'll figure out one of these days to unbundle the DigiLocker as well. Now they're at least getting embedded everywhere. That's a good thing. So that was another point I wanted to actually give you historically. And then putting citizen at the center was a very, I think, lot of our mental models come by fundamentally putting institution at the center. Okay, this is very key. Much of our discussion is about institutions, providers being in the center, regulators sometimes being in the center, citizens almost never at the center. I think that mental model is changing quite fast. Without that mental model change, you will not have a fruitful discussion. So let me put it very bluntly. You will not come out of this room workshop discussing anything useful unless you say you have to, it's about citizen, and that also hopefully solves the future. You were thinking that there will be a lot of regulators fighting over whose turf it's going to be. Hopefully, if you put the citizen at the center, then you get to sort of resolve those matters slightly easier. The last point, I think, the value of data. I don't think you can put value. Value is what gets unlocked subsequently. So identity, we ask the same question. What's your value of identity? Depends on how you use it and what it means to me. If for the first time when I'm opening a bank account, maybe the value that accrues to me from that one act of using identity may be very, very different from you and I, who probably had identity and one more meant maybe less value. So I think we should not look at value in the enabler, and it's very key not to look at the data or the ID or even credential. What's the value of an academic credential lying in DigiLocker? It depends on the workflow. It becomes the service that it's unlocking. Depends on the context and the individual whose service is being provisioned to. So I think we should, if you don't separate that, you will try putting price based on the value. And you can never determine value. And then you will complicate the hell out of it. And we see that with a lot of times saying, okay, if I give credit, then maybe a percentage. But if I do, are you giving my data for credit? Then maybe I'll need more money. All those complicated discussion will happen, and it's a death by straight. Okay, death by design, not death by chocolate, death by design. Okay, so here is I wanted to give you a view of how did this network thinking emerge, and it needs some historical perspective. Computing by design was not available to most people. When it started, most companies didn't have access to computing. Of course, people didn't have access to computing. It was meant for very large organization who could afford to buy IBM mainframe or HP, parallel computers or tandem computers and so on, right? Or digital wax, earlier days of computing. Very, very limited. And and a lot of our mental models, our governance mental models, and our business mental models is still pegged with that early thinking, okay? Because we designed for the past, and that is why I wanted to shift that thinking. But in the 90s and in the early 2000s, we started shifting towards computing, and by then, laptops and desktops. Bill Gates dream of laptops in or desktop in every computer in every home, somewhat, but it never became human scale. It never reached that many. And if you look at the human scale, laptops and computers never reached. So it remained a very institutional digitization story. So the banks digitized well. Demat mutual fund digitized well. Mutual fund, everybody, hospitals started digitizing. Consumer never did. Consumer was still going to the branch or going to thing, and slowly in the 2000, people who had access to laptops or desktop could go to internet banking portal. So the internet banking, all the mental models, and that dramatically changed. It changed when the smartphones were launched. I think the first time in the history of humans, we have a computer in every home, a powerful computer in everybody's hand. In fact, that's one thing you don't even leave when you go to the bathroom, right? You can leave children outside, wherever you want. Computer phones you're not leaving. There's no chance. And this is key to remember, because phones are becoming the agent for you to transact. Remember, phones are becoming the agent. That's a powerful computer in your hand. So now you have to ask a different set of questions. You have to ask a different set of questions. Where does then the data lie? Where does the transaction occur? Where does consent actually happen? What my first point, key point, is that computing, because the computing is moving to the person, individual, to the edge, much of our interactions and consent management will move to the edge, and data will remain in edge, will never be at the center. Remember, that means data will not be accumulated at the bank. Data will not be accumulated at a central middleware kind of system. Estonia is a classic example of that, right, where the X road was actually designed because the first generation digitization, people didn't have access to computing devices and interaction mechanism like voice and touch. So the voice and touch on one side and the computing was the real pivotal moment for us. And this is very, very key. Okay, this mental model is very hard to imagine what's going to happen. Even the cloud computing is centralized. Amazon is centralized. Our platforms are centralized. But much of that is moving. What do you see? How do you see this trend? Is what Web3 tried doing and overdoing it, but without governance and sort of Wild West. So it didn't work. And also they went after currency and they went after systemic disruption, and that's not the right way to do. But you will see a lot of startups today starting to do identity right on your mobile. There is nothing on the server. Nothing on the server. There's no server. Think about it. And this is very key, because you can't design for the past. You have to design for the next decade. So when you design for the next decade, you have to, as Nandan says, trend is your friend. If you don't play to the trend, you will be swimming against the big tsunami of the decentralization and allow ability to everyone having a compute and interaction access. And this is key. Last Sunday, I had a brilliant meeting with EU Director General, who is looking at entire EUs, and entirely they are moving towards credential wallet and an agent on your phone, which is going to enable you to use your trust credentials, verifiable credentials, identity credential, data as credential, to be able to transact. Because of that, immediately he was fascinated that we moved not only data to the edges and consent to the edges in a decentralized fashion, we are moving transactions to the decentralized fashion. He said, oh, that's perfectly aligned to how we are thinking, that everybody would have some sort of a device access, shared access, maybe in a family, nothing wrong. But I will have a computing device that is programmable and that is intelligent enough, closer to me, who knows my context, to be able to actually keep my safely, keep my data, keep my credentials, and consent to transact. And when you transact, then I can do a peer-to-peer transaction. If That's what Namayatri is all about today, right? World's first peer-to-peer mobility network live, where the auto rickshaw driver and you are actually transacting. And that is very powerful, and India is full speed going towards that. But our mental models, when you discuss all your governance mental models, you get stuck in, the centralized mental model, that I have a platform. I would even argue that would consent manager move closer to the future consent manager? One of you will build a consent manager that is purely on my phone with no footprints on the cloud. Perfectly possible to do that today, right? But of course, it will navigate itself to do that. And the second one is unbundling of the transaction chain. Keep this in mind. This is also reason why digitization happened. The central is because only large banks could buy mainframes of big computer. But the moment client server, cloud computing started coming, we said, okay, digitization is not for us. Digitization can be exposed, and the first generation of exposure came through internet banking portals, mobile banking apps, things like that. But very quickly with UPI, we unbundled the second layer. Now, I would have drawn this actually with the citizen at the center. We put citizen at the edge, that's okay. But that's also another way of thinking. Yeah, maybe. But it's very, very important to remember this point, that we are unbundling the core transaction value chain and different parties are starting to play. And this is another mental model we need, which is why DPI thinking, or what's called building block thinking, is very key. In UPI, that's first time we unbundle the payment workflow, the interaction out of the bank. IMPS was inside the bank. Digitized, but not yet unbundled. And we unbundle that, right? And now we'll unbundle a lot more close to this individual. This goes back to Argo's point. For individual, I don't care how many regulators exist. I don't care whether you are not a health regulator or a finance regulator. I need a health insurance and I need to do something in the hospital. I need money. For me, it's one life. It's just me. And this is what you would see in ONDC as well. Artificial siloing of sectors is going to blow back on us because individuals don't recognize sectors. They say, I go to airport, I pick up taxi, I also want food. I don't care whether taxi transport authority is different from the food authority. That's you guys cooked up the institutions, right? I didn't. So it's very, very key to remember the rebundling of many unbundled sector building blocks will happen closer to the individual. So individuals, agent or apps or whatever I have with me should be able to rebundle many solutions, and that goes back to precisely moving from aggregator account to multi-sectoral account aggregator reimagination. Now with our law, I hope it's possible for account aggregators to go beyond financial sector. But if you don't understand this clearly, that mental model, you will have RBI would say, no, it's just my cup of tea, or FSDC would say it's mine, healthcare, let them create their own. It's a very systemic view, not a citizen view. Citizen view has to be that I have a consent manager closer to me who understands my security and my care and helps me deal with consents in my own language, not even English, not 8-point font, long legal documents, but really explainability of consent closer to me and allow me to put together the products that I want. And of course, trust is the last one, comes from really very important part of it. When this happens, when you are unbundling and closer to that individual, but institutions are regulated independently, so you are unbundled from the institution and rebundle closer to the individual. Near to me, the idea of network trust and idea of governance itself has to be reimagined. Governance, even I would even worry that a centralized NIU-like structure is not going to cut it for us. So that itself, I think there probably another tag of 2.0 we should put them then in. Right? In the sense, it is very important to reimagine when a multi-sectoral facilitated network starts coming, where everything is decentralized on the edges, like the fractured tree was showing. How does then governance work with one entity in the middle. That itself is become a bottleneck. That entity will become very powerful. So you stated that really well. Ability to solve, if you have to go decentralized, then ability to govern should go closer as well, right? Very well said. That statement was very important. It is very important to think about, at least for now, think about multi-layered governance framework, where a core network facilitator is not concerned about bank statement. Then you are deep in one sector, right? So how do you layer it correctly so that you can have different sectors still having the authority, like RBI having the right authority to be able to make the right statement, but within their respective domain, which is what their care is. And SEBI having to do that, IRDA having to do that, but probably healthcare regulator having to do that, and transport or anything else. And we will come across education. How are we going to deal with education data, skilling data? Without education, skilling data, there's no way individuals can progress in life. So all that will start playing out, which is the reason why today's account aggregator and DigiLocker seems two different things. They are actually no. DigiLocker was the first version of DIPA. We wrote the document, we built an app, but then we rewrote the document with DIPA and we have a network. But because it's a very central regulator view or a authority view, not a citizen view, we find it very hard to unbundle that problem, right? So it is very key that you still give the space for an autonomy for governance to each regulator. But what do they need to do? They need to do very, very minimal in their care. But if everybody does that repeatedly, can the network absorb that and facilitate and that absorb onto the network? So this requires, again, techno-legal way of thinking. That means trust is not outside the protocol. Governance can't be outside the protocol. It has to be blended in 3 levels. At the protocol level, how are you going to, it's not a protocol governance I'm talking about. It's a governance rules induced into as policy, as code, as we call it, right? Induced into the network itself. And we are talking about some of that with ONDC. If you want to actually create a policy that says in peak hours you are only allowed to do EV or some concession pricing or any of that, you should be able to deploy today. Today such policies come out as PDFs and they lie in a website. Now it doesn't get translated into actual execution. And so this is very, very key. And second part of that is that governance with lots of people mental model. And I want to pick up on Rahul's point on that. When everything is digitally, the source of truth is digital and non-repudiable. And then you have a very, very powerful mental model of how network troubleshooting of an individual, for example, in UPI, if I send the money, other person didn't receive the money. Today, NPCI cannot have 100 people like headless chickens running around as a central facilitator because somebody didn't get money. It has to be also protocolified in one sense. It had to be built into the protocol to create troubleshooting protocol even before ODR sets in. So it is very key, and ONDC you can see this rating, feedback, troubleshooting APIs or issue resolution APIs being integrated into the system itself so that the evidence can be picked up and the right party can be notified, and then hopefully we have an SLA agreement at the multi-contract level, at the network level, that allows that individual to act without sitting together all in a big room and trying to troubleshoot, because that's a very bad mental model. So I think again, remember, trust and governance cannot be with lots of people in the room. It has to be again by individual knowing my institution, what am I as a concern manager supposed to do, and am I doing it right? What am I as a bank supposed to do? Am I doing it right? And then of course creating common facilities that you are doing, many of you are doing, ODR, audit trace, troubleshooting, SLAs, all that thing. And interoperability also, governance of interoperability and all that thing comes in the same place, where RBI might make a call on some interoperability standards for bank statement, but health data or anything academic credential, individuals have to make it. So how does a network facilitator, a centralized network facilitator, deal with such fractals, right? It's very, very hard unless the facilitator themselves is not a centralized entity. Facilitator is truly a facilitator of a networked governance, not a centralized governance. You are executing a network, but governance is central. Cannot happen either. So think about a network governance through a networked model, right? Governance through a network model, and that also is very, very key for you to think about. Without that, you won't get, and people will join. UPI success really became, and Nikhil and Samoz were running around early days to solve this matter, because trust comes from early interactions, and the early trust is very, very key for you to actually unlock. So it's very important that you do, and I'll end with this. So technical interoperability is already there, but I don't think we are yet there. Frankly, while interoperability is there, lot more governance, troubleshooting, rating, feedbacks, lot of those APIs have to be. Governance APIs also have to come. Governance cannot be on paper and with people. Governance has to be protocol, in the protocol, and then, but a common network facilitating a movement of data without knowing what is inside the packet. Think of you as a post office, postman, right? Postal network. Then individual working groups and individual regulators taking in charge of saying what should be inside the packet specifically, and what are the rules of specific purpose codes in finance, for example. And some of these also I worry, frankly, why today Rebit, as an example, has purpose codes embedded in the protocol. As an individual, I worry, because purpose sometimes is, if you put citizen at the center, purpose starts becoming cross-sectoral purpose. It's not obvious. I'm getting a credit for my operations, surgery, or financial loan. Now, how does this play out? What is a purpose code for it? Who regulates? So I think you have to be worried about this centralized way of thinking and into a lot more decentralized way of thinking. And this is coming thick and fast to you. And unfortunately, but we are very good position though. I think we are so mentally aligned to the idea of everything moving to the edge, data and consents remaining at the edge, an individual at the center making the right decision using a digital agent that helps, can be assisted or self-service. I don't care about assisted self-service, but closer to me. And many conversations I am part of, and it's very interesting. People always think center. Okay, it move much farther from, the farther you move from the citizen, all the overheads of an institutional thinking comes into play, and you just flip that matter. And one last thing, you scared me when you said that we don't have access to our data. I think there's an access word. Hopefully we can twist and turn and do whatever thing for access to be able to actually create portability. Okay, I hope you don't scare us saying you don't have portability. Access is the first step for portability. So it's always self. Thank you so much. Yeah.